SpaceX just changed Pad 2, and the change reveals something huge. Watch closely. 2 deluge tests, back to back. 1 full blast. Then 8 minutes later, a second, weaker blast. Why 2? Because that's not for launch. That's for catching a super heavy booster. The catch rails moved. Twice. On both arms. No one confirmed it. But the pad just told us everything. SpaceX is preparing to catch a version 3 rocket. Here's the proof. Let's start with what actually happened at Pad 2. The scaffolding is gone, removed from the center of the launch mount. That, by itself, sounds boring. But watch what happened right after. Engineers ran a full-speed test, launch clamps retracting, ship quick disconnects pulling away, and then water, a lot of it. This is the deluge system. Its job, normally, is simple. Cool the flame trench, reduce acoustic damage during launch. But this test wasn't normal. It came in pairs. First, a full pressure blast. Then, 8 minutes later, a second blast. Weaker, smaller. Here's the question nobody at SpaceX has answered publicly. Why 2? If this were only about launch, you'd expect 1 blast, 1 event, 1 purpose. But 2 blasts, spaced apart with different intensities, only make sense, in theory, if you're preparing for 2 separate events. Launch, and something else. That something else has a name, catching a booster. That's not confirmed. But it's the most likely explanation on the table. Let's slow down here because this idea sounds almost impossible if you've never heard of it before. Picture a 15-story steel tower. Now picture a rocket booster, taller than a football field is long, falling back down from space at hundreds of miles per hour. The plan isn't to land it on legs, like earlier SpaceX rockets. The plan is to catch it, mid-air, with 2 mechanical arms called chopsticks mounted on that same tower. This isn't science fiction. SpaceX has already done it successfully with earlier Starship boosters, but version 3 of Starship is a different machine. Bigger fuel tanks, different engine layout, a completely revised launch sequence, which means the tower likely has to relearn how to catch it. And that's exactly what those paired deluge tests suggest, if the theory holds. A lighter blast, timed for the moment of catch, would protect the mount from residual heat and fuel vapor without disrupting the arms as they close around the booster. It's a small design detail, but small details are usually where the real story hides. Here's where this gets more interesting. SpaceX has not announced which flight will attempt the first catch of a version 3 booster. Not Flight 13, possibly Flight 14. But look at the pad. The tower is already rehearsing the motion, twice, on both arms. That doesn't prove intent. But it looks less like caution and more like a company that already knows the answer and just hasn't said it out loud yet. Why would SpaceX stay quiet about something this big? Here's one possible explanation. If they say it publicly and it doesn't happen, they eat headlines about failure. If they stay quiet and it works, they get to say, "We did this the first try." Companies sometimes protect their timelines by controlling the narrative. We can't confirm that's what's happening here. But the pad hardware is telling us more than the press releases are, and that gap is worth watching. Now here's a detail that connects directly back to a real, documented problem. Before Flight 12, SpaceX had trouble with something called the liquid oxygen dump vent. In simple terms, this is a pipe that vents extra oxygen before launch to keep pressure inside the rocket safe. The problem was the vented gas was blowing back into the tower structure itself. That's dangerous. It's also expensive to fix wrong. SpaceX's solution at the time was an external extension. Essentially, a longer pipe pointed further away from the tower. A patch, not necessarily a permanent fix. Now look at what's happening at Pad 2 today. Crews are excavating near the commodities lines, the pipes that feed propellant and gas into the tower. And they're laying in a brand new insulated cryogenic line. Connect those 2 facts, and here's a theory worth considering. A vent problem from Flight 12, and a new cryogenic pipeline appearing months later in almost the same location. SpaceX may be quietly rerouting that oxygen vent, sending it back down through the tower structure itself, instead of out into open air. That's speculation, not confirmed by SpaceX. But if it's true, it would mean engineers didn't just patch the Flight 12 issue. They redesigned around it completely. That's the difference between a temporary fix and a permanent solution. And it would tell you something about how SpaceX operates. They don't like band-aids. They like rebuilding the problem out of existence. While Pad 2 gets quieter, more precise upgrades, something much bigger is happening at the original Pad 1, and this is where the story shifts from small clues to a full transformation. The quick disconnect arm at Pad 1's tower is being taken apart, piece by piece. Load spreaders, essentially large support beams used to safely hold heavy components, are being staged nearby. One set, sized for the elbow joint of the arm. A smaller set, for the extension that holds the disconnect hardware itself. Scaffolding now wraps the entire base of the tower, running all the way up to the arm carriage. That's not a small maintenance job, that's a full structure overhaul. And underneath all of it, literally underneath, the flame trench is being dug deeper, reaching what looks like its final depth. In the process, crews are uncovering the remains of 6 massive support piles. These are leftovers from the original launch mount design, the one nicknamed, informally, the 6-legged monster. That structure is gone now, but its foundation isn't wasted. The new tower design appears to be built to reuse those same support piles. Here's the emotional core of this detail. SpaceX isn't tearing everything down and starting from zero. They're building forward on top of what came before. That's not just efficient engineering, that looks like a philosophy. Improve, don't discard. At the same time, vacuum-jacketed pipes used to fuel the Super Heavy booster are already going into place at Pad 1. A concrete foundation has finished curing, ready for a commodities bunker, essentially, an underground storage and protection structure, to be lifted directly onto it. Notice something about the sequence here. SpaceX isn't waiting for one phase to fully finish before starting the next. Trench walls are being welded while the bunker foundation cures. Pipes are going in while the tower disassembly continues. This is parallel construction. Multiple systems, built at the same time instead of one after another. Why does that matter to you watching this from home? Because this is the difference between a company moving cautiously, one step at a time, and a company racing against its own competition. SpaceX appears to be choosing speed on purpose, and every parallel task likely shaves weeks, sometimes months, off the final timeline to a working launch pad. Now step back, because this is where the individual details start forming a bigger picture, at least as far as the evidence allows. Pad 2 is quietly getting smarter. Precision upgrades, a possible fix to an old vent problem, a likely rehearsal for the hardest maneuver in the entire Starship program, catching a next-generation booster. Pad 1 is being rebuilt almost from the ground up, but strategically, reusing old foundations, running construction phases in parallel, refusing to waste anything that still works. 2 pads, 2 philosophies it seems, same underlying goal, get Starship flying, catching and reflying faster than anyone thought possible. And here's a pattern worth noticing. One most people miss when they look at these updates individually instead of together. None of this looks random. Every one of these choices, the paired deluge blasts, the pipeline reroute, the reused piles, the parallel construction, points toward the same conclusion if the theory holds. SpaceX isn't just preparing for the next flight. They may be building an entire system designed to make booster catches routine. Not rare, not risky. Routine. Let's talk about why this actually matters, beyond the steel and concrete. Catching a booster instead of landing it on legs removes weight. Landing legs are heavy, and heavy hardware costs fuel, costs payload capacity, costs money. If SpaceX can reliably catch version 3 boosters, they would eliminate that weight penalty completely, on a rocket that's already the largest ever built. Now scale that up. A reusable booster that doesn't need to carry its own landing legs. Fewer parts to inspect, repair, or replace between flights. A faster turnaround from landing to next launch. This is the same logic that made Falcon 9 the most flown rocket in the world, except now it could be applied to a machine roughly twice its size. If the upgrades at Pad 2 are what they appear to be, a dedicated system built specifically to catch a version 3 booster safely, then the real headline isn't the water test, or the pipeline, or the scaffolding. The real headline, if this analysis holds up, is this: SpaceX may be closer to routine super heavy catches than they've publicly admitted. So here's where this leaves us. SpaceX has the pad ready to rehearse a catch. They have a possible fix for last flight's vent problem. They have 2 separate launch sites now under construction in parallel, in Texas and in Florida. But they still haven't told us the one thing everyone actually wants to know. Which flight gets the first version 3 catch attempt? Is it Flight 14, as most signs currently point to? Or is SpaceX intentionally staying vague so they can quietly attempt it earlier, without the pressure of a public promise hanging over their heads? We don't know yet, but the pattern is there. That answer is coming. And when it does, you'll find out whether every one of these small, unannounced pad changes meant what we think they meant. That's the pattern the data shows. Thank you for breaking it down with me. Like, share, comment your take, and subscribe to the Space Brief. Now, check the video on screen for more.